So this is a response to Techne Episteme's video, which was a response to my video on consciousness. And he raised a couple interesting points and asked me a few questions, and I'm going to try to answer them and clarify my position. First, he said that a theory of consciousness isn't really something that science is after, because consciousness is more of a metaphysical concept, and it wouldn't be useful to science. And I think, this is a good point, and so far as it goes, I agree. But we don't necessarily have to take an instrumentalist or a pragmatist's view of what science is trying to do. In other words, it's not always the case, or I don't think we should always assume that scientific knowledge is merely what is useful, rather than what is true in, the realist sense, that the knowledge we have, that we gain through science, somehow reflects reality. I think we should keep both of these, the pragmatic and the realist position, in mind, not siding exclusively with one or the other, so as not to close the door on any forms of knowledge which one or the other may provide us with. But taking realism seriously for a minute, if nature is both subjective and objective, if it has both of these aspects, then a complete understanding of the natural world would require that we include, if not consciousness, then at least experience of some kind. If we want to do physics and leave experience out of it, we can pretty well mathematically map the way particles behave without referring to any subjective element. But as soon as you get to life, and you see the intrinsic purposes, the telos evident in living bodies, and the inferred experience behind that telos, it becomes difficult to leave consciousness or the subjective part of the material world, of nature, out of the picture, and still account for the phenomena that you're trying to understand. So if we're going to take a realistic view of what science is attempting to do when it gains knowledge of nature, and if we're going to admit that nature isn't just a collection of atoms, which it is that, but see, the reason I wouldn't say that it's just that is because there's obviously, we know in our own case, as human beings, that the knowledge we have of the world is somehow, it's in relation to the world, but it's not simply reducible to the material world. Because if it were, we wouldn't be aware to have knowledge of this material world. So this is why I see nature as composed of both of these elements, a subjective and an objective. They're not different substances like Descartes' mental or thinking substance and his extended or material substance. They're just different aspects of one process. The process of the unfolding of the material universe is both an experiential unfolding, something which happens from the inside out, and a material unfolding that sort of happens from the outside, and all these different bodies are interacting with one another. But these bodies that compose the material world, whether we're talking about atoms or molecules or cells or animals, they interact with each other intelligently. They don't simply bang into one another. They organize, they self-organize, and become more complex over time. And Teilhard de Chardin came up with this law of complexity consciousness to describe this cosmic evolutionary process from the Big Bang until today, at least on Earth. We can see that as the complexity of these material bodies increases, so too we can only suppose does their conscious experience. So when you ask a question like, does consciousness arise from the brain, I would say yes, in the sense that the complexity of the brain supports the complexity of our human consciousness, but no in the sense that that subjective element of nature didn't just magically appear when the human brain got complicated enough. It was there in germ, in a more primitive way, from the very beginning. And as it became more complex, as it evolved, it gave rise to what we call human consciousness. And so rather than locate consciousness in the brain, I see it more as a process of brain in body in world, the world, interacting with other bodies in that world. And so consciousness for me emerges from this intersubjective and interobjective interaction process. And you can see that there's layers to this, just as each of the neurons, the billions of neurons in my brain, all relate to one another and play a very important role in the emergence of consciousness. But I don't think the brain, though it is necessary for consciousness, is sufficient. I think you also need, the body. The mind and the brain is embodied, and the body is in a world with other beings, other subjects with bodies. And what we call consciousness is always in that matrix. It's only given in that context, and we should always remember that context. And part of the larger perspective that I'm trying to take is a move away from what we would call a substance ontology, which Descartes' dualism between a mental and a material substance is the most famous example. But many modern materialists will say, well, we don't need the mind substance, let's just stick to the material substance. Though I am a materialist of sorts, as a pan-experientialist, I think to conceive of matter as a substance is wrong-headed, as a substance, or in other words, matter as something which requires nothing but itself in order to exist. Because I said our scientific knowledge of matter already implies that there is a subjective element to matter, because knowledge is only possible because we are subjects, because we have a perspective on the world, and we can test the knowledge that we think we have from this perspective and come to approximate what the objective case is more and more as we continue our scientific investigation. This is why I said that consciousness is a precondition for there being a world at all in my last video. It's a precondition in the sense that for us to have scientific knowledge of the way the material world works, we have to assume that we're conscious, because knowledge, knowing, is a conscious activity. You can't know without being conscious. So, is there anything else I want to add? I think when we talk about the mind or consciousness arising from the brain, we're assuming a certain metaphysical conception of causality is true. For a materialist, there are only material and efficient causes or mechanical causes operating in the natural world. For pan-experientialists, we also have to consider the formal and final causes operating in the natural world. The formal cause would be, in the case of a living organism, that idea or that form of wholeness which emerges through the development of the organism, which can't be reduced to the parts. So the whole is greater than some of the parts. I mean, we've all heard that before. And in complexity theory and developmental systems theory, this idea of wholeness playing such an important role in how evolution works and how ontogeny works is evidence that I think, even from an empirical standpoint, formal causality, the emergence of a whole which has downward effects on its parts, can no longer be ignored. But then there's also final causes, or final causality, which is the telos, which is evident in nature. And in thermodynamics, this is also finding its way into our scientific picture of the world, in that, at least on a macro scale, the final cause underlying everything that goes on in nature is this drive towards increasing entropy, towards dissipating gradients. And you can almost see how all the complexity which emerges in the universe is a byproduct of this need that nature has to dissipate gradients. There are certainly other ways to work in final causes. I gave this example of a final cause through thermodynamics and formal causes through complexity theory and in developmental systems theory. And so as a pan-experientialist, rather than seeing nature as a gigantic machine, I see nature or the universe as a living organism. and it was born, and over time it develops into a more complex organism capable of understanding and experiencing its world in ever deeper ways. And human beings, as one example of intelligent life on planet Earth, express this need for this organism to grow and understand. And I think we have to see the universe in this way to account for ourselves as human beings, as conscious, intelligent entities which practice science and gain knowledge. Otherwise, we're such a fluke, such a bizarre thing in an otherwise mechanical universe that we don't belong here. And rather than see us human beings as not belonging, I want to see the universe as human. And that may be an anthropomorphism, but maybe if we are of this universe, then seeing it as a human universe isn't such a bad idea. So thanks for your response, and let me know what you think.